welcome to Commander Central episode 311, and today we're going to talk about answers and removal in Commander. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
Chris, welcome back to the show, bud. How's it going?
Oh, it's going. I actually feel normal today for the first time in a while, so it's pretty good.
You actually got to come into the shop and play a couple games this week, too.
Sure did. I totally took you out with Mill. That was great.
You did. We played three-player games, and each person won a game, I think, so that wound up being a pretty good distribution. But yeah, you milled me out with, what deck was it even?
I was playing Jaleva. It's the change of my Persistent Petitioners deck.
That's right. Yeah. That was pretty cool. I was not expecting that to be a mill deck. So yeah, you killed me there.
I almost got your spiders too. Darn
You
dragons.
did.
Darn dragons just get spiders.
Yeah, dragons versus spiders. I mean, it was tight too. That was also a tough one though, because like everything with reach, and you need a couple like death touch reachers. That's tough to poke through too.
Yeah, well, they were just good games overall.
They were. Yeah, we had a good time. So now we gotta get back to the shop here at some point next couple weeks.
Yeah, I was there before both of you.
That's true. You were. Then you left.
And then I had to leave.
Yeah.
I ended up getting some packs of Commander Legends because the shop had them, and cracked a Jeweled Lotus.
Oh, jeez.
And a Sakashima.
Do you even have a deck for the Jeweled Lotus?
I mean, in a perfect world, that's a turn 1 Brago.
I guess, sure. And that,
But no,
it probably kind of makes sense in that deck, I guess.
No, it's just going to go in a binder, because...
Trade it for something down the road at some point.
Right, yeah, I mean, I don't have any really good recursion in that deck for artifacts, so, it'd be a one-and-done thing, and I'll never see it in my opening hand, so...
Sure.
Yeah, I have one as well, and it just sits in my binder, because it's just, I don't think, honestly, in my personal opinion, I don't think the card's good enough for casual EDH.
It depends on your deck. I guess there are some decks where it's real solid. There are some decks where it's kind of meaningless. So, depends what you're playing. It's definitely not like an auto-include or anything, for sure. I do run one in my Edric deck, but that's at a higher power level, too, where I don't traditionally play at, so that's the only place I have one. So Max made out with his random pack cracking.
Yeah.
Nice.
The Sakashima paid for the packs, and the Jeweled Lotus was just gravy on it all.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
It's not like Sakashima's a cheap card either. So, well, congratulations, Max.
Thank you.
Well, if you out there in listener land want to reach out to us, talk about any crazy cracks you've had in packs, how'd you go about doing that, Chris?
Or you can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central. And you can also find us online at cmdrcentral.com.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDRCentral and check out our reward tiers, such as joining our community to chat and play virtual EDH with everybody.
Yeah, we appreciate the support, whether you support us via Patreon or just by liking and upvoting the show on whatever medium you use to listen to it. We appreciate it. It means a lot. So thanks to everyone out there who supports us in whatever way you support us. I think we're in that kind of lull between sets right now, as short as the lull is these days, and it's pretty short because we've already gotten a few new Capenna spoilers. But they're like we occasionally have a week with no new news. So as a result, we're just going to kind of jump right in and make this a pretty efficient show and just talk about removal. And the reason I want to talk about it, because we've done shows in the past about real specifics, but I want to talk about it at a little higher level, because Chris, you made a comment when we were playing the other day about how you feel like you've been playing against people who don't bring enough answers.
Yes, it's
whether it's counterspells
ridiculous.
or removal or whatever.
Yeah, it's been pretty bad lately, where any game that I've sat down in, it just seems like my deck is the one that I have to force, any tutor I have in the deck has to go for a removal spell. I can't go for anything else because no one else is playing removal, so I have to become the control player on the board, even if I'm playing the aggro deck, which actually turns the game into a nightmare for me.
Yeah, that it's such a tricky thing to balance, too. But you're right. It is frustrating for one to be the person in the pod who has the answers, and then you feel like you have to use all of them. Because number one, you can't. You can't be the only person playing police at the table. You just are going to run out of gas. And then what it kind of does is, in a way, it rewards the other people who don't bring anything because they're not spending mana, they're not using cards. They get to just run straight ahead, barrel straight forward. So you're using resources they aren't using, and then sometimes you feel like a jerk too because you're the only person answering anything. And that's not really fun either.
It's definitely a strategy, though, that I've seen people play where it's just, you choose something in the deck and you just don't play it. So
Sure.
Whether it be removal or whether it be in certain decks, people don't play creatures, or for instance, in your Annex deck, you don't play instants or sorceries, really.
Yeah.
So, you take that out of the equation, which then makes the deck more streamlined. So I can understand just jamming big fat things into the table and, just being like, well, if you guys have anything, you do. If not, I'm just going to keep doing this. This is my straight up game plan.
Well, especially with the amount of cards we have lately. Like, whenever a new set comes out, and I just coincidentally enough happen to have my little spreadsheet up here with cards I've put in my decks from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and I won't go over the whole list, but like I added 5 cards in my Anax deck. I added 7 cards into my Arden and Essior deck.
Holy cow.
I added 4 into Edric. I added 4 into Glissa. I added 8 into my Jury deck. That Jury deck, that's almost 10% of that deck. It's like, I mean, we're closing in on that large of a percentage of my deck just got swapped out with one set. So when we get that many sets every year, and you're making, even if you're only making like, okay, you're making 3 changes, 2 changes, whatever, when there's 8 sets a year, your deck is really churning, and it's really easy to look at your deck and be like, well, man, I got all these new toys in the last year, and I haven't even had a hardly chance to play with them. Maybe I'll just pull out this one removal spell or this board wipe or something.
Trap.
So I
That's
get
a
it.
trap. Don't fall into it.
Yeah. Well, so okay. So let's get into, because there's a bunch of different ways you can call answers. I think answers for specific things, like let's say Grave Hate, for example, because we always have preached you should run that. That's one thing I think is pretty easy to still keep some in your deck. You put a Bazooka Bug in if you're playing black. You put a Scavenger Grounds in everything, or at least I do. Maybe you throw in a Soul Guide Lantern or Lantern of the Lost. I mean, it's easy to take care of your Grave Hate without cutting into your deck too much, but everything else takes up multiple slots in a way that, a Scavenger Grounds really doesn't. So let's look at board wipes specifically, because this is, I think, one that has been affected a little bit by the pandemic too, when people were playing online. And I'll ask you, Max, because I think you play a little bit more online than Chris does, definitely. Have you changed how many like straight up board wipes, like Wrath of God, Damnation effects you're running in your decks at all in the last 2 years since you've been playing on Spell Table?
Sometimes. I don't think I'll use my Ishin deck as an example. I didn't build it with a set number in my head, but
Sure.
In Dramoka, let me pull up my list. I think I run 3 board wipes in Dramoka right now, and I always kind of keep a Wrath of God on the side, in the deck boxes in case I want to swap it out, depending on, how the deck has been playing.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't think I've changed how many I run. So let's see. Austere Command, Cleansing Nova, Single Combat. So I currently run 3 in Dramoka with a Wrath of God just kind of sitting there if I need a 4th, I can swap it in for, something.
Sure.
And take something out.
Now, see, I would say for myself, I definitely have pulled back a little bit. I tended to run 3 more or less in every deck. Maybe it would be 4, maybe it would be 2, but it was usually 3. I've dropped down to 1 or 2 in most of my decks, and in part, that's because of Spell Table games, because I found when you're playing on camera like that, it's not quite as the dead space in between turns isn't quite as interesting as it is in a game in person. When you're playing in the shop with some people or playing at someone's house or something, there's a lot more kind of random BS going on. People, just shooting the breeze about their decks or their life or what they're doing. It doesn't happen quite as much in Spell Table. So when you wipe the board and everyone has to start over again, it extends games in a weird way. I feel like it doesn't necessarily extend them in person. And sometimes I'd rather just have the game end and play another one on Spell Table in a way I maybe wouldn't when I'm playing face to face. So I've pulled a couple of those board wipes out. On top of that, I play on stream where you have people watching and you're trying to have the game be entertaining. And the same thing applies there. There are situations where I'm like, I just don't want to start this game over. We're an hour and 15, hour 20 minutes into it. I just don't want to reset the game state. I would rather lose at this point and play again than have it be boring to the people that are watching it. So that is something that's affected me in terms of particularly straight board wipes. I've just started running a couple less in my decks to the point where I always have at least 1, but I think I'm averaging 1 to 1.5 now in my decks versus probably 3 or maybe even more than that prior to COVID.
Have you found, Dana, that is impacting how your decks work in person, when you go to the shop? Because, I get the points about making the games entertaining when you stream with EDH or Cast. But when you're at the shop and playing, if your deck only has 1 answer, you're kind of
right.
The opposite of what Chris, has been just kind of explained earlier, that he had to use all of his answers to control the table, where now you're the person that maybe doesn't have I'm sure you run a lot of spot removal or target removal, but knowing you only have one board wipe, you're kind of relying on the pod, and if you get in a pod with where people aren't running board wipes, you're just kind of sitting there in stuck board states, essentially.
I think I've thought about that quite a bit, actually. Number one, I do think you're right. I run a good bit of spot removal, target removal, single target removal, whatever. So that kind of offsets it. I do tend to have an answer. I don't need my answers to all be sweepers. So I'm not necessarily in a terrible situation. I tend to draw a lot of cards. My deck has a lot of card draw in it too. So the velocity helps there. I can dig down to, I can have like less board wipes, and I will find my targeted removal maybe more frequently because I'm digging down in a way maybe some people don't. I also have found I've tended to build my decks in the last couple of years, especially where clogged board states generally don't matter too much. You know, my Arden SEOR deck, SEOR is almost always going to have a evasion in terms of flying or protection from colors between swords and commander's plate, whatever. So that deck pokes through pretty easily. Jury doesn't care because he's doing direct damage with jury stuff for the most part. So at least for me in my situation, it winds up not being a big deal, but I can see how it would be if you've sculpted your deck down to like just one or so board wipes, how it would lead to more bad game states where everyone kind of is stuck and gummed up for sure.
Okay, that makes sense.
Has it changed what board wipes you're running in the last couple of years? Because we've had, White's gotten so many good board wipes recently. Does anyone even run Wrath of God or Day of Judgment anymore?
I still run Wrath of God because, I'm old school and I have the full art foil players rewards one. So I'm
Sure.
like, this never coming out of the deck. It's going to stay in here forever.
which is a great reason to run a card for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have a foil like Eternal Masters Wrath of God, not the cool version Chris has, that I occasionally slot back into Jamocha like I was saying. But yeah, I don't run either of those in any of my decks. I think the closest I get to those cards is like Supreme Verdict in Brago.
Because, Cleansing Nova, we got a couple years back. We just got Farewell. There's just so many ways to right now, in addition to like the austere commands or merciless evictions of the world. The board wipes also, I think, can double as like an artifact sweeper, an enchantment sweeper, or whatever. I think that adds a lot of utility as well, I think. So like I feel like if I run one board wipe less, but it's one that can do more things, that also offsets it a little bit, I think. Because I'm not running Wrath of God anymore. I mean, I'm just running. I'm ready to pay 1 or 2 more mana and have the card do a lot more different things.
Yes.
I found that I tend to, since a lot of my decks care about needing my creatures, or at least my commander, I have found that I've started playing more of like the single combat type cards where everything gets sacrificed except for a creature or a planeswalker, because it still allows me to keep like my key piece of my deck on the board or that really good creature I have. So what if I am stuck with just maybe not my commander, but I'm stuck with maybe like a Baneslayer and everybody else has a bunch of stuff? I can wipe that board, keep my Baneslayer, and swing away,
Yeah, that the ability to come out of the board wipe ahead versus casting the board wipe and like letting everyone else rebuild first makes a pretty big difference for sure.
Agreed.
So how about, speaking of board wipes, I guess, how about wipes that aren't, necessarily creature based, but like the Vandal Blasts of the world or your, back to nature kind of effects that sweep enchantments? You guys seen more or less of those, or do people still not run those in the way that they run creature sweepers?
I definitely think not enough people run that in general. That's probably my biggest peeve when I sit down at a game is that most of the time a game is won due to the other permanents that are on the field, not the creatures, but the enchantments and artifacts. And people aren't running any removal for those types of things. For instance, in our game when we were playing, I had that Lifeline artifact, 5-mana artifact that says for every 1 damage dealt, instead that player exiles the top card of their library, off to the side. And that stuck around for how many turns before it was finally removed?
Too many, because that's why one of the reasons I got milled out.
Yep. I mean, and it's just because it was an artifact. If it were a creature, it would have been dead in no time. Just because, people don't play enough of that kind of removal.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think years ago, I tended to not run those. I'm like, I'll just deal with artifacts and enchantments with spot removal. I'll sweep creatures away. I would have some creature spot removal as well, but I have ran a few more sweepers in recent years for artifacts and enchantments for sure. People took a long time to come on to Vandal Blast for some reason, but Vandal Blast is a crazy good card.
It's a phenomenal card. I'm surprised I don't see more people playing it.
And back to nature, 2 mana instant, destroy all enchantments. And if you're playing in a deck, I mean, like, okay, if you're playing an Enchantress deck, that probably isn't very good. But like, if you've got 4 enchantments in your deck or something, why not? You're almost always going to get way more value, and it's going to get around, hexproof and indestructible or whatever.
Yes, that's true.
So like that's something I've started to run more of. I wouldn't say I'm doing it in every single deck by any means. But if I'm playing red, I'm probably at least considering Vandal Blast, and I would bet I have it in more decks than I don't. For that reason, I'm running Patrician Scorn, which is an enchantment sweeper in my equipment deck. So I don't have any enchantments in there, so I'm running that in there because why not just sweep away all of them when it doesn't affect me at all. So yeah, that's one I do think people probably should look into a little more. I mean, there's always Bane of Progress has been around forever, and that still sees a good amount of play, it seems like. But
well, because that card's just OG. I mean, OG overpowered card. Let's just destroy everything and then make a monster.
Right. The fact that it comes into play as like a 14/14 after you do it is fantastic. But now, Max, you I don't think run many of those like single type sweepers aside from your Wrath of God effects. You're not dealing with artifacts or enchantments like that. You're dealing with single target removal mostly.
I tend to try to play like an Austere Command or a Cleansing Nova.
Sure.
In all my decks that run white. But yeah, I don't I think there's a Vandal Blast in my Ubosh deck, but there isn't one in Ishin. Yeah, I tend to either, depending on the colors, I like running Austere Command because it's modular and kill creatures and kill enchantments, artifacts, whatever I want, but
right.
I don't run those straight up, like you said, or something like Fracturing Gust. I don't run anything like that in my decks.
So the other problem that comes up with sweepers, and I talked about how they can lead to, slow games a little bit and maybe aren't the best thing on webcam, but there definitely is a point I think you hit where if you have too many in your deck, it can just make it kind of a miserable experience to play against.
And that's an understatement.
Our shop owner, Chris,
yes,
and you've played against his Super Friends deck that he had for a while that had at one point like 15 board wipes in it.
I think it was 19, something like that. It was like literally it was any turn he could just board wipe on command. And, he's playing Planeswalkers, so just like, I'll just clear all the creatures and sit here with my Planeswalkers. What's up, guys?
In power-wise, like or strategically speaking, that totally makes sense. Like his deck played better with that many board wipes in it. I totally get it.
Yeah, and it wasn't, and the reason I never got upset about it, a lot of people did, was he had something going on. Like he had Planeswalkers out there and he was doing stuff with it, and he's just keeping everyone from killing his Planeswalkers because he has no other way of winning except for through the Planeswalkers.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's part of the strategy, so there's no reason to get all upset about it.
But it also led to a lot of 2-hour games.
That's an understatement. I don't even know if I sat in a 2-hour game with that. There's been a few times where it's just like we hit like that 2-hour mark, and I'm like, can you just kill us yet? Can I scoop? I mean...
Right. So that's a downside too. They're finding that balance between like keeping bad things from happening so you can win the game and just making sure it isn't a bad experience or at least a super slow experience for everyone involved is a tough thing to find that sweet spot for sure.
Yes.
And I think that's much tougher with board wipes or sweepers than it is with single target removal at least. So another thing that I think has popped up in recent years, and this is I think just a result of having gotten a gazillion new cards. When I was first playing Commander, the amount of things you had access to that would deal with multiple permanent types in terms of single target removal was pretty limited. Black didn't really have anything. White had the ability to hit an artifact or an enchantment, I guess, on like a disenchant, but they had disenchant really. There wasn't much else. Green had Beast Within. That was their really only option to hit every target. I guess there was Naturalize and there was Corrosive Grip, but again, there was only a couple of those style effects. Today, however, in the world where, a Braid is an uncommon, or was it even a common?
I don't even remember now.
I think it was an uncommon. But regardless, I mean, a Braid's a crazy card. And how many white-black like variants on Mortify are there now that hit, destroy target creature or enchantment or artifact if the CMC is whatever, or, Anguish and Making, exile and lose a couple life, or Utter End, or there are so many of those targeted removal spells that hit multiple things. So number one, I think it's there's less excuse even than there was once upon a time to not run a bunch of them. But the ones you run can deal with so many problems. You just need to put those things in your deck.
It does become hard, though, with those cards, because I play a lot of them, and I have since the beginning, where you have them in your hand, and you're sitting there, you're going, this can take out anything, and you look around the board, and you're like, do I just hold on to this and not take out anything and wait for something worse?
Right. Well, so I thought of this the other day. I was playing in a game. I don't remember who I was playing against. The person drafted turn 1 Soul Ring. And turn 2 came around.
Kill on sight. That's just what happens there.
And I want to say it was turn 3 or 4 I drew a Glamour or something. Soul Ring is universally recognized as like one of the strongest cards ever printed. Okay, logic would dictate I would hit that Soul Ring at that point on turn 3 or 4. I have a Declammer in hand, it's a Soul Ring, I don't want that person to get 2 extra mana every single turn from that point on.
Yep.
However, I had already put an Arcane Signet out, and the green player had already like Nature Lord once and done something else, and somebody else had, dropped a Thran Dynamo or something at that point. And I'm like, what does it matter right now? Like, yes, I could remove the Soul Ring, but like at this point, everyone's making the same amount of mana. We've all ramped ahead, and if I don't remove that Soul Ring, I was like, in 4 turns, am I going to go, oh, I should have killed that Soul Ring? I felt like I couldn't imagine myself saying that, but what I could imagine myself doing was killing that Soul Ring, and in 4 turns going, God, I can't believe I didn't say that Declammer for this Achroma's Memorial or something.
Yep.
So that's another part I think that's really tricky regarding answers, is understanding when to use them. Soul Ring, like I said, is a crazy powerful card, but at that point, by the time I had an answer, even on turn 3 or 4, it wasn't doing anything that everyone else's cards weren't doing.
I still stand by my decision, though. Turn 2, Force of Will, Sylvan Library is the best play in the world.
Is that a great play, Max?
Boo.
Well, in I'm not saying you shouldn't get rid of a Soul Ring. Like if it's if you drop an island and pass, and someone drops a Soul Ring, and you can, I don't know, daze it or just, what does Spell Snare hit? I think Spell Snare would hit a Soul Ring, right?
Spell Snare hits something CMC 2, I do believe, exactly 2.
Exactly 2. Yep.
Okay. There's one variant that hits CMC 1. I forget which one it is.
You could force spike it or something like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, whatever. There's definitely situations where like you could do that and it makes sense. I'd probably Swan Song a turn 1 Soul Ring.
I don't know, man. I get smacked by that 2/2 bird repeatedly.
That's true.
That would be payback.
Bird wreak havoc. But the fact that you'd consider not doing it against one of the strongest cards ever printed.
Yeah.
Because everyone has access to that Soul Ring, and everyone's going to probably ramp and race out, and the thing that's going to lose the game is going to be something that's not that Soul Ring, probably. Maybe that isn't true in CEDH, not at that power level, but I think anything below that, it once you get past a certain point, it's not worth removing. That's a tough thing to figure out. Like what? Because I've definitely blown removal spells, and then a turn later been like, I can't believe I wasted that spell because this thing just came down.
Yes, I've done that so many times, but then you look back and you're like, well, no, my play was proper. I just, they had another play to go on top of it.
Sure, you can. Again, you're playing against 3 people, too. Like, the amount of threats that are coming out. And that's where it gets frustrating when you're the person that feel like that you have to play the police and stop the threats when no one else is. And you've got 3 times as many threats to deal with, for sure.
Yeah. Just don't be, that person, though, too, that's at the table where you're playing, we'll say you're playing the mono red deck and someone's playing green, someone's playing white, and someone's playing black or something. And one person has a whole bunch of enchantments out. Don't look at the players who can remove and be like, you guys are the colors, so remove it. Like, don't force that upon them because maybe they just don't want to.
Yeah. Or maybe they're seeing something or have an idea of what's going to go down in a way that you don't, too. So another point I kind of wanted to make here a little bit is regarding the card Nature's Claim. So Nature's Claim sees a ton of CEDH play because it winds up, it's a 1 mana, destroy an artifact or enchantment, and your opponent gains a couple life.
Yep.
4 life, I believe.
Correct.
For 1 single mana, that's super efficient to solve a problem, particularly if you're playing in a competitive place where your every single mana counts. And as a result of that, I've seen that card pop up down in lower power levels. I think people need to rethink things like efficiency in terms of what it does, how much it affects your deck. And here's why I say that. I don't think Nature's Claim is a bad card. I get why people run it, particularly in competitive, but all it does is destroy an artifact or enchantment. For 1 more mana with I'll use Declammer or Unravel the Aether for an example, compared to Nature's Claim, I can deal with indestructibles in a way that Nature's Claim can't, because it shuffles into a library. I can probably prevent recursion because it's way tougher to get something out of your library than it is to get something out of your graveyard. I can avoid death triggers. Like if you Nature's Claim a Wormcoil Engine, you've got 2 little Wormcoil tokens to deal with. If you Declammer one, it's just gone. So you don't deal with any kind of death triggers if you have an artifact creature you want to get gone and someone's got a grave pact out. Not that happens that often, but like you dodge that. Any kind of death trigger you get away from. And I've used Declammer just a ton of times to deal with someone's top of deck tutor. Just to force that. One time years ago, when someone had me milled out, I actually used it to put an artifact on top of my library so I wouldn't die in my draw step.
I've had you tuck my commander before they had the
I tuck your Perforos, I think it was, wasn't it?
Mogus all the time.
Mogus, yeah, that's right.
At that point, I just stopped playing Mogus whenever I saw you playing green. I'm like, nope, it ain't
Nope.
happening.
He's got to unravel the 8th Random Glamour in here. Anyway, so the point was that the versatility you get for paying 1 more mana in that case is worth it. Now, at some point it isn't, right? Like if it's a 5 mana removal spell, does how many features need to get tacked onto it before it's worth paying 5 mana for a removal spell? I don't know, but I would say people need to pay a little more attention and not go with like the conventional wisdom, or at least understand why you're running a card. Yes, Nature's Claim's great, but understand that it's a great card in CEDH, and maybe it isn't as great of a card in non-CEDH. So I think people need to be a little more purposeful about their removal, I guess is the way I would phrase it.
Yeah, I could get behind that. I mean, there's some, in my opinion, I don't think Nature's Claim's that great in, casual play anyways, Go back to the instance of, you're talking about Deglamour, well, you got, your Croson Grip and all that other stuff,
right.
That I think is just strictly would be better because, I want the versatility. I want it to actually hit something and I don't have to worry about it type of thing.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of added value on that Croson Grip with Split Second.
Yeah, you want to tap that rock to do something, or you want to do that.
Yeah.
It's like, nope, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, for sure. Now, not to say, and I'm not saying efficiency isn't great. Like I run Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares in like almost all of my white decks. The efficiency's crazy there, but that's less. That's probably just because those cards were mistakes more than anything.
I don't know if they were mistakes, but we'll see.
It's one of those situations where like when you print a card in Alpha and then every removal spell afterwards is worse.
True.
It's like Ancestral Recall to a degree. Like, oh, every draw spell we're going to ever print is going to be worse than Ancestral Recall. I guess so. We probably messed up the first time.
The next swords that they ever print, is on a 5 mana creature that requires you to exile a card to have it come in like that.
Yep. That's true. Good point. That's a pretty big bomb too. Yeah, fair point. So let's talk about counterspells here for a minute, because everyone loves counterspells. That's like everyone's favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
Boo. I had dead during games if you didn't have counterspells. Boo.
So that's kind of why I'll mention that. And you play a lot of competitive Magic, Chris. Like
yes.
You don't take people removing stuff or countering spells personally.
No, not at all.
But despite only having like 5 counter spells in that dragon deck when we played on Tuesday, I countered like 6 or 7 spells because I countered a couple, and then I had a
Midnight Clock
that went off and shuffled stuff
back in. I couldn't
back
remove it. I was looking so hard for removal too, and I couldn't get rid of it.
And drew a couple of the counter spells that I countered stuff that I had used previously and got to use them again. But it was you, so I knew you weren't going to take it personally or be annoyed. But like, had it been somebody else, I would have felt kind of bad about like constantly having counter spells. Or
it wasn't
felt that way.
It wasn't bad. So in context, the reason you were countering fogs is what you were countering.
Yes.
So it was kind of like you were countering my counter spell. It's pretty much what we were doing.
And there was a couple of them in a row. It was like you did this. I actually literally you fogged or something, and I countered it. And you had to cast another one. I had to counter that one.
Yeah, I don't. Oh, that one I cast. I'm like, the Moment's Peace is the name of the card, and I even got all cheeky with it, like, just give me a Moment's Peace.
I was like, no. But yeah, I mean that's the problem with counterspells, such as it is. It is frustrating. It is annoying getting a spell countered, and when someone's got an answer to everything you do, that does get frustrating too. So I'll ask you guys this, and I'll start with you, Max, because you do play a little bit of blue. Is that something you think about when you put counters into a deck, or are you conscious of like, okay, I want to have answers, but like I don't want this to be oppressive or frustrating for people to play against?
No, I'm also not one of those players that runs 12 counter spells in my blue decks, whether it's mono blue or 2 colors or 3 colors. I mean, I'm looking at my Brago list right now. I have 5 instant speed counter spells, and I have Glenowender Archmage, which is essentially a counter spell on a creature that I can repeat. So I have 6 in that deck. And in Tuvasa, I think I have 3. Maybe 2.
Okay.
I think it's only 2, to be honest. It's Pact of Negation and Arcane Denial.
Okay. Now, is that because you just don't have room for more?
I don't have room for more in Tuvasa. Yeah, that'd probably be the easiest explanation. I mean, I could put a Fierce Guardianship in here, or I could put straight up counterspell if I wanted. But I was aiming for stuff that is a single pip or free, essentially. Like Pact of Negation is more of a break the glass in case of emergency, because if I don't have that double blue and 5 mana, come my next turn, I'm losing the game, essentially. Well, I am.
Right.
Where in Brago, most of them are all single pip, if not, I think I have a mana drain, so that's double pips. But that's also a 2-color deck. It's not split between 3. It's easier to have 2 blue mana up at any point in time. And I also have mana rocks in that deck where Tuvasa I don't. So I think in Tuvasa it came down to like my mana base and like what the deck is trying to do, and this is more just protecting my commander, essentially. These are protect Tuvasa at all points, and that's what I run them for.
Okay. Now, and Chris, do you even have any... Your Jaleva deck is blue, I guess. Is that your only deck with any blue in it currently?
Yes, it is. I'm counting right now. I think I have 5 in that deck, and all of them... not 2 of them are actually hard counters. The rest of them are in there for other purposes as well. Like I play Pact of Negation and Arcane Denial in there, but the other 3 I have a Muddle the Mixture, a Cryptic Command, and a Mystic Confluence, and they're there for the other abilities on the cards. Pretty much is why they're in there. You know, you transmute on Muddle, and then the other ones are for like tap draw, bounce draw, that kind of fun jazz.
Yeah, Mystic Confluence is great in that way. It can be a counter spell. You can just be like, oh, I've got 2 other counter spells in hand. I'm just going to draw 4. I'm just draw 3 cards. The ability to use it any way you need is really useful.
Yep. I mean, that's what I look for whenever I want to play counter spells. I want something that's going to be a little bit more versatile. That's why I love Arcane Denial, because you get the card draw. Yes, you're giving card draw to your opponent as well, but it costs minimal, amount of mana influence into it. So, I mean, perfect card overall.
One thing about counter spells, and I guess this probably applies to maybe to board wipes and to targeted removal as well, I think is worth considering. I do think there's something to be said for not painting a target on your back. I've definitely played with that deck before where like the person clearly has 15 counter spells in that deck, and when all things are equal, if I don't need to kill one person next turn because they're going to go off and win, I don't know, I'm pretty inclined to swing at that person that's got a ton of counter spells, just because they're annoying. Agreed. So I do think there is an advantage to flying under the radar, and we've talked about that, I guess, over the years and other things too, but I do think that applies to this, to removal and counter spells too, is finding that balance between running plenty of them without, being annoying. But like when it's not necessarily just about like trying to make a good game experience. Strategically speaking, sometimes it makes sense to like not paint a target on your back. If you're the person who's like, this is my deck, I do have counter spells in here, but there's only 5 of them and I'm only going to be using them to save Tuvasa or save my Brago deck. This isn't a control deck. They are my, kill switch button if things get out of control and I need to stop something bad from happening. That's much easier, I think, for people to deal with, and you're much likely to get salty players when you're using those counter spells surgically than you are when you're just like, oh, that's annoying, I'm countering it. Oh, I don't like that, I'm countering that too. I'm gonna counter that too. Like that's gonna get you targeted sometimes, straight up. That's gonna get you knocked out of games when you wouldn't, because people just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, that's I guess a good word is a noob player's mistake is to counter everything. You don't want to counter everything. You want to counter key cards and save the counter magic for those key cards. Because once you spend all your resources, you have no more, and then you're just at the whim of the game.
There's a old Far Side cartoon that's got like a Viking sitting at like a bar with his buddies drinking, and he's holding like a big like club in his hand. He's like, there's something about a new club just makes you want to look for an excuse to smash something. And like behind him walking in the bar is a dude blowing a giant bubblegum bubble. And I always think of that cartoon like that's a counterspell player, and behind him is just like any excuse to counter something. I want to counter it.
Just fire it off. Got to fire it off.
And I remember, too, being in situations, there was a player years ago at our shop that played a lot of blue, and he played a lot of blue control. And at some point, I remember noticing, oh, you don't want to sit to his left. Because if you sit to his left, he's just going to counter everything you do, and everyone else is, you're going to drop a Llanowar Elf, and he's like, I'm going to counterspell that. And the next person's like, okay, untap Elish Norn. No response. No, I'm tapped out. All right, comes back around. You play your. All right, I'm gonna Nature's Lord to get a land. I'm gonna counterspell that. Okay, pass a turn. And the person's like, okay, I guess I'm going to drop this Sun Titan. Any response? Nope. I'm like, son of a. So that's the thing too, right? Like for new players, for sure, that's 100% something I've noticed over the years is just wanting to let the counter spells fly. Max, I'm gonna go back to you for a second. You talked about wanting to run things with blue pips. Let's talk about like the counter spell choices you make. What is the most important thing for you in a counter spell? Is it efficiency, or is it like extra value? Like a scry effect or exile the target, or in the case of Mystic Confluence, being able to draw some cards, or do you like to mix and mash those things?
For Tuvasa specifically, it is efficiency, single pip or no pip, and it has to be a hard counter. I don't really want to mess around with negates or, counter target creature. It just needs to counter the spell, and that's all I'm looking for in that deck. That's why I pretty much have it down to those 2 counter spells. Brago, I mix and match. So, like, I run Arcane Denial, I run Mana Drain, I run Pact of Negation, I run a Force of Will, but I do run a Fierce Guardianship, which is, a negate, essentially.
Sure.
I used to run...
But it's free,
it's
which
free.
is a big deal sometimes.
Right. I used to run Mystic Confluence. In fact, the Fierce Guardianship replaced Mystic Confluence when I was able to finally pick one up. But I was a big fan of Mystic Confluence for the longest time because of, 5 mana is a lot, but it does a bunch of stuff. Like, you get to choose any of the 3 modes up to 3 times. So, like, cool, you can counter something, and if they tapped out, they can't pay that 3 mana. Cool, you just countered that spell. Or, I just want to draw 3 cards. That's cool. Like, it's very versatile, and I liked that about that card, but just is, something got printed that's better.
Sure. I guess that question probably matters a lot more for your deck, too. If you're in, like, 3 colors, 4 colors, 5 colors, then Arcane Denial is much more important, since it only requires 1 blue versus a counter spell is, just a better negate in a mono blue deck, because you're always going to be able to make all the blue mana you want for the most part.
Right.
So that's definitely makes a big difference for sure. And I guess, like, looking at that Brago deck, you do a little bit of draw go there too, so it's a little bit easier to hold up those counter spells because you have other things to sink that mana into. If you, for the most part, if you don't use it on a counter spell, you can use it for something else.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, for sure. Okay, so how about answers for answers, I guess? And we've I guess addressed this in the past too, but is that something you still spend a lot of time thinking about? Max Eerie Interlude, you always have one ready whenever board wipe happens.
All my decks are triple sleeve. There's an Eerie Interlude behind every card, Dana. That's my
Is there?
secret.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you just always have one handy?
I always have one. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of answers for answers, specifically when it comes to board wipes, because a lot of my decks are all creature focused. I like the combat step. Brago's a little different, but, Eerie Interluding a board state of a bunch of ETB value creatures is really nice. You flip over you blink a Maul Drifter and a Cloud Blazer, and you're drawing 4 cards and gaining 2 life. That's great. I also don't run a lot of recursion in my decks. Jermoka has a Seasons Past and a Once in Future, but having that Eerie Interlude in that deck just makes it so I don't have to worry about that board wipe. Or maybe the board state has gotten bogged down and I'm the one that needs to board wipe, and I just want to have that advantage of having all my stuff back right away at my end step. So I can, if I have enough mana, I can board wipe and save all my creatures.
I would dare say that in the last, since the cards came out, there's been very few cards I've seen win more games at the rate that Teferi's Protection wins games.
Yeah.
Sure does.
It's so good.
It just turns everything around. A card is insane.
Last time I got to play Teferi's Protection, I actually pulled a Sunforger off of a Velomachus to grab it out of my deck to save my board.
And here I thought you were going to say you did it in draft because you pulled like the mystical archive version of it.
No, I play it in my Dragon's Approach deck, which doesn't come out very often, and I played it just recently before my surgery, and I was able to pull that off, and then the table turned on me, and I was like, that was a mistake.
Yeah, I think at this point, I have, particularly since it got reprinted and the price dropped, I think I have Heroic Intervention in every one of my green decks.
Same.
And if I don't have Teferi's Protection, it's because it's crazy expensive, so I just haven't got one. But I had a couple of them early on, so I was running those in a couple of my white decks, and I would probably do it in most of them. So being able to having answers for answers is a pretty important thing these days, I think. I'll be curious if we get more of those kind of effects too, because back in the day we used to get quite a few, regenerate all creature kind of effects, and I don't know how effective those are anymore, given the amount of
Exile.
Mass Bounce or sacrifice or -1 counters or exile. I feel like just the days of those things saving you from a Day of Judgment are kind of past.
Yeah, I thought regenerate was a dead term now. I thought that they weren't going to do it anymore.
They don't add new regeneration cards. They no longer print regeneration, and as a result, they no longer print, Wrath of God and Damnation both say creatures can't be regenerated.
Yep.
So we don't see that anymore either. So I guess there's some push and pull there. Even though they don't add regeneration stuff, they also no longer put the can't be regenerated clause on board wipes. So 6 one, half dozen of the other. The thing they do now is creatures gain indestructible till end of turn. Is there equivalent of that?
Yep.
Okay, makes sense.
But the same problem exists there. It still doesn't like solve a problem when someone, casts a Toxic Deluge or doesn't get around that Cyclonic Rift like Teferi's Protection does. Teferi's Protection's just nuts. It solves every problem.
Yeah, no, I think that was a mistake card.
Again, that was one where they probably went too hard the first time. If you look at like a Red's Impulse draw, they started off with it kind of weak and have kind of ramped their way up a little bit. The same is true of Black, sacrifice a creature to draw a card. Altar's Reap is pretty decent, but like it was safe, and they've since gotten multiple better versions of that. Teferi's Protection, they started off in the full with the perfect version of it, and it's gonna be tough to print anything better than that for sure.
That just seems how White is, though. They either go, all the way on one spectrum, or they're on all the way in the other spectrum. It's either really, really good or really, really bad. There's like no in between.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I mean they're definitely playing on the conservative end when it comes to like White's card draw and ramp and stuff right now. They definitely don't seem to want to do anything too powerful there for sure. Although they're getting better and we're getting a few more answers, but it is a little bit conservative, I think, definitely.
Are they getting better though? I mean, maybe that's a topic for another show.
They're getting better. They're still insisting on making it always a 2/2 soldier or something. So
and a basic planes to
they're
hand.
samurais now. Yeah. Samurais, okay.
Right.
They're still soldiers. They're still soldiers.
Someone asked me to look at one of their decks just last night. It was a mono white angels deck, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, there's half of your creatures in here are not angels because they're all card draw creatures in white.
Yep.
Like that sucks when you have to like change out half of your creature types in your tribal deck just to be able to get card draw.
Yeah, that's the issue with monocolor decks.
Yeah, I just wish they weren't so insistent on that in white and attaching it all to a body. But they'll eventually figure it out, I guess, in theory. So, okay, so I guess some final thoughts here. Chris, you still feel like you run more removal than most people. Is there a set number you think of answers and decks you should have that when you build a list, are you counting those numbers, or are you just building it like, I know I like this card, I want this card, it just feels right? Is it a kind of season to taste, or do you have a specific measurement you're using?
I'm trying to think of what my specific is of that, because I know I have something that's very, like, I don't want to say, I'm trying to think what the mathematical equation is, because it's not like a third, but I know it's a hefty chunk of the deck is dedicated to removal of some sort, whether it's, removal of everything, targeted removal, or protection from removal type of thing. Come I'll lump that in, so that's what we're talking about, or counter spells. A good portion of the deck goes towards that, and I want to say we're pushing, maybe a quarter of the deck or so at least has to be around there, somewhere right around in there, but that's including everything.
Okay.
How about you, Max?
I don't know if I have a set number, but I definitely have when I build a deck, I know what cards I want. So when I'm building something with white, so when I built Ishin, I knew I wanted a Generous Gift. I knew I wanted, a Blasphemous Act. I knew I wanted, a Merciless Eviction. Those are the type of cards I wanted. In fact, I think, Dana, you and I discussed when I was building the list that I actually had too many board wipes because it is so creature-focused.
Yeah, that could be a problem, too.
Because the deck was so creature-focused, I actually ended up cutting a board wipe for like a draw spell, because it was, okay, you're right, 4 board wipes is way too many when I need creatures on the board. And especially since I'm not running a lot of, recursion, like I don't run a mass, what's the Rise from the Dark Realms? That's what I'm thinking of. No, I kind of agree with Chris, I consider counter spells removal when I play blue, so, I may run a Pondify, but I also might run Arcane Denial, and either way, I call that removal because the card never hit the field. It never became a problem.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't have like a set number. I'm not counting them being like, okay, I have 8 board wipes, I need to have 3 more, or I have 8 removal spells, I need to have 3 more, whatever. But it's the kind of thing where I do tend to address it too. I when I first brew a deck, number one, I do make sure I have a noticeable amount. I don't know what that number is, but like, I can look at my deck and feel like that looks right. And then when you play it, I can usually tell, I just need 1 or 2 more answers in this deck. It's just not enough. So you can get a feel for it for sure. But I do think that's the thing people need to keep an eye on. Like, if you find yourself sitting there multiple games in a row going, I wish somebody had an answer to solve this thing over here. Like, well, maybe then you need to have an answer to it. Like, sometimes that starts at home too. Maybe the problem is that you don't have enough in your own deck.
Yeah, that's true. Another thing to look at too is when you're looking at creature removal, look at what your creatures are, because your creatures are just creature removal built in. Blockers are a thing. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to rely solely on the creature removal aspect of the game, as you can rely on the removal of everything else.
Yeah, like, I don't count my Death Touch stuff in my Glissa deck as removal necessarily, but like when I put a lure kind of effect on something and swing it with it, I'm going to kill like 4 or 5 of your creatures.
Yep. And it is so annoying.
So that's something in my deck too. I tend to like think about those things. Like, okay, well, I've got this, like Planeswalker removal, for example. Sometimes I'm conscious, do I have ways to deal with Planeswalkers? Okay, there is a beast within here, I can hit a Planeswalker, there's something else. And sometimes like, well, every one of my creatures has evasion, so I can probably poke through on a Planeswalker. Whereas if I was in a deck that, my Kresh deck, for example, there's not much evasion there. So I definitely make sure I have my Chaos Warp and a beast within in that deck, so I can hit Planeswalkers if I need to, because I can't rely on combo damage for them. So that's definitely something I do try to pay attention to, is to make sure I have as many ways to deal with everything as possible as well.
Yeah, I think Planeswalkers are probably the hardest thing to remove, aside from lands, in my opinion. But, I mean, as we've talked about before, most people, you should be running, a Field of Ruin or a Strip Mine.
Yeah,
Strip Mines
something.
drop drastically in price from what it used to be. I mean, so something in there, Ghost Quarter, for instance, just to get rid of those pesky things.
Yep, absolutely. All right, that is going to wrap up episode 311 of Commander Central. I am Dana. You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max, and you can find Chris at WiseSwishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find them on the Twitter birds at Ursa Bear Walker, and our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. Until next week, I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.